Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring today's Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
I get a persona sometimes that I'm a leader in the Army and I'm supposed to be put on this pedestal and I'm not supposed to have all these flaws. You know, we have some great stories where Broden just brings us right back to reality. But it's great because it allows us to stay humble and it allows us to connect with those around us.
That's our guest this week, Mark Huhtanen, a colonel and 25-year veteran in the U.S. Army. Mark and his wife, Shelly, have two boys, Hayden and Broden, who has autism. We'll hear the Huhtanen family story, including what it's like for a military man to raise a child with special needs. That's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello to host David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's listen to this conversation between Mark Huhtanen and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Mark Huhtanen of Columbia, South Carolina, who is a father of two and a colonel and 25-year veteran of the U.S. Army. Mark, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
It's great to be here.
You and your wife, Shelly, have been married for 18 years and are the proud parents of two boys, Hayden, 17, and Broden, 15, who has autism. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Sure. I grew up in really across the state of Montana. My parents were educators, and I was born in a small town kind of in the middle of Montana, and then we bounced around to different jobs as my parents kind of progressed through the school network, and we finally ended up in western Montana in a small town of Hamilton, which is just kind of south of Missoula, and that's where I graduated high school from. My sister, I have a younger sister, she graduated high school there, and then my parents actually still reside there. They retired there. My dad did 28 years in the education system. He wrote grants for a while to help other schools get money in. He also was a city administrator in Hamilton after he completed his time as a school administrator. And so that's where they reside now. My mother, after she went out of teaching, she worked for the National Institute of Health at a laboratory there in Hamilton, where she did her 20 years there and retired out of that. So it was kind of a Western upbringing, I guess.
Excellent. I did remember that your dad was also a veteran. He was a Vietnam veteran.
Yes, he was. I think it was 4 years that he served. He graduated the University of Montana as a ROTC and got his commission. I think, as the time, I think he understood that he was going to get drafted if he didn't. So he went that route, got his college degree, and then served a tour in Vietnam. Came back and asked to go to Germany. Well, came back and married my mother, asked to go to Germany, and the Army said, no, we're going to send you back to Vietnam. And my father politely declined, and that started his education career.
Okay. And did he talk about his experience in the military when you were growing up? Or
a little bit. I think the older I got, the more, I learned about his time. It was, I didn't know a lot of what my father did until I got older. And then right before I came into the military is when I kind of got his full story, and he kind of shared it with me, which was very surprising, And then what was very interesting is as I've gone through my 25 years, I think I kind of reached a point at probably my 6-year mark where I was getting out of things that he was familiar with, the different echelons and responsibilities and stuff like that began to be different from what he had experienced. So that was kind of a passing, I guess, that had happened in our relationship.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. So how would you describe your relationship with your dad?
He was always fair and firm. That would be the two words that I always use to describe him. I mean, from him, I think I got my work ethic. Working hard was a quality that he always instilled in me as a child. We always had chores as kids. You didn't play until your chores were done. But then he modeled that too, and made sure that all of his stuff was done before he would sit down and watch a ball game or before he would relax. And so I think that's where I get my work ethic from. As I hit my teenage years, I think like every father-son relationship, that's where some friction started, as I started to come into my own. But he was always very, very supportive. It does make me laugh looking back on it. I was, as a junior in high school, I always remember him looking at me going, say, how are you going to pay for college? It's so, wake up call. And so that's when I started to apply. That's how I fell into an ROTC scholarship, as I started to do different things and apply. And I actually had tried to go to Annapolis to go into the Navy, and that didn't go through. And so then I ended up getting accepted for an Army ROTC scholarship. So I don't think I would have even thought of that if my father hadn't asked me that question.
Yeah, well, that's funny you should mention that. In our family, we had a little running joke with our 5 kids. I would do this. I'd say, you hear that? That's the real world knocking, right? So that was my way of reminding them that, there was a gravy train and it was coming to an end at a certain point in time. Anyway, thanks for sharing. So was there a lesson or two that come to mind beyond the, being fair and firm and, these core values, the work ethic that your dad modeled? Was there a lesson or two that you've incorporated into your own parenting, for that matter?
Integrity was always very important to him. It's a great Thanksgiving joke now, but my father was the school principal where I was, and I played high school football. And I think it was my junior year, I got a date to homecoming, and I stayed out 10 minutes past curfew and got the young lady home, but I was 10 minutes late getting back to my house, and my father never lost his temper, but he said, are you going to call the football coach or am I going to call the football coach? Because that was, he wasn't going to have the principal's son violate the school rules. And so, I think that was a great lesson for me. And it's, integrity is important. And I try to pass that on to Hayden and as we go.
So my recollection was you went to Montana State University and you were a biomed science minor in chemistry. And your career took you from studying science to going into the military, and I'm wondering if you can explain how that transition took place.
Sure. I was always going into the military. The original plan when I first got there as a starry-eyed freshman is that I would get my pre-med degree and apply to medical school and go on to be a doctor, and then basically pay off all my debt by serving in the military, because there's a couple different programs. I think it was probably my sophomore year. I went into an embryology class and there were 50 microscopes on the table, and he handed out a blank sheet of paper and he said, look in every microscope and tell me which phase of development that is. And at that point, I knew that I did not have the photographic memory to pass well in that class. I think I fought my way to a D+ in that class, but I knew that some of the medical school stuff was not probably going to be there. And so back then you couldn't change your scholarship was kind of tied to your major. And so, I didn't know what to do. And so, I talked to my parents and they were very supportive, but they're like, hey, stick it out for your scholarship, and then, you can go into the Army. There's lots of things you can do in the Army if you don't want to be a doctor, and then you can get out and, go find your career field. And so, that summer, the Army actually sent me to a school, of all places, out in Hawaii. So I got to experience travel. And then I got to do fun things like rappel out of helicopters. And I've always been an outdoors person. And so I was like, well, what Army job allows me to do this? And so they're like, well, join the infantry. And I was like, okay, I'll join the infantry. And then next thing you know, 25 years later, here I am still doing it. So
That's fabulous. Thanks for sharing. My recollection was that your military career is taking you to Germany, to Alaska, and to a number of other places. And I'm wondering if you can give us a quick flyby.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I started out, of course, intermixed with schools, military schools. But after I graduated Montana State, I spent the summer at Fort Lewis, Washington, which is out by Seattle, leading other cadets. I'm a brand new lieutenant, and so part of our job is to go back and lead those that are still coming up through. And then I reported to my official school at Fort Benning, Georgia, which is probably 2 hours south of Atlanta. And then I went through all of the infantry training, Ranger School, all those airborne school, and so on. And then my first assignment was in Germany. So I think it was the fall of 97, reported to Germany, 3-year assignment. It was a great time, got to travel all over Europe, came back around 2000, went to another military school. And then my idea was to go to Alaska as a single guy and just fish and hunt when I wasn't working and enjoy the great outdoors in Alaska. And I got there in March, and I met Shelly in October, and I left Alaska. I ended up doing 2 tours there. So I left 6 years later with a wife and 2 children and a dog. So I didn't, it was awesome, but I didn't do my hunting, fishing adventure quite the way I thought I was going to.
Yeah, well, you did have a lot of tangible takeaways from your time in Alaska.
I did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then from there, I went to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, because that's a big transition school for everybody. And it's a year-long school, kind of equivalent to a graduate degree. And I got accepted to another school, so we ended up spending 2 years there. And that was kind of the pivotal place. That's where we figured out what was going on with Broden. And then every assignment kind of after that, from there we went down to Fort Hood, Texas, and then back to Fort Benning, and now we're here in Columbia, South Carolina. But all of those assignments were really charted around places that the Army could put me where Broden could get care and be taken care of like he should be.
Well, thanks for sharing. You've seen a lot of the country, but you neglected to mention that you've done 4 tours.
Yes, I have. I've done 4 tours to combat and multiple training tours.
So if you had to pick one experience from your combat experience, which one sort of is top of mind for you?
Well, I think my first tour was probably, and not to be cliche, it was probably the most defining tour for who I am now and our family. I deployed on my first combat tour in 2005. Hayden, our oldest, was 1 year old, and Shelly had just found out she was pregnant with Broden. What was really neat is back in those times for the 12-month deployments, you would get a 2-week leave period somewhere in the deployment. And one of the things that my commander did was, hey, he came to all of us that had wives expecting and said, hey, we're going to do the best we can to get you back around the delivery dates, if there's not an emergency. And so we all got to kind of plan that. And so I was able to come. I didn't make it quite on time, but that's a different story. But I was there right after Broden was born. But I think that was a defining moment because I was a captain at the time. I was more at the tactical level on the ground. And then we got towards the end of our deployment, and the big shocker was the Army knew it was going to surge and uplift the troops, but they couldn't get enough units over there in time. And so we were literally 10 days from coming home when they said, you're going to stay. I was able to get to a phone and call Shelly. I said, I don't know what's happening, but they've got this big 3-star general coming in to brief us. And I said, I don't think I'm going to be home on time.
There's this issue of expectations.
Oh, yeah.
I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's 3 months away. It's 2 months away. It's a month away. And, things usually happen on schedule, but not always.
Oh, yeah.
And that's got to make it really hard, just psychologically and emotionally.
Oh, absolutely.
And is there anything that you learned as a result of that Shelly learned that would be an important takeaway that you might be able to share with other families? Because that's the real world.
Right.
Our expectations in reality are sometimes, not in sync.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I think as I talk through it with you today, in some ways that probably a little bit, not a lot, but in some ways started to prepare us for Broden's diagnosis down the road, because that would happen about a year and a half later. And I think what it taught us, it definitely taught us as an Army family that plans change and you're really not home until you're home. And so I think we began to understand and take it as a blessing when each deployment. And I guess what I'm trying to say is later on, I would have a deployment that was cut short because we were drawing down troops in Afghanistan. And so instead of the full year, I got to come home early. And so those kind of things become even more of a blessing after going through something like that. So.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of managing expectations. And I guess certain things are within your control, and then there's certain things outside of your control. And maybe it's a reminder that, you can't beat yourself up over things that are beyond your control.
Absolutely.
Do the best with the information you have, with the facts that you have, and just move forward. Try not to dwell on the coulda, woulda, shoulda. So let's switch gears and talk about special needs first on a personal basis and then beyond.
Sure.
And I'm sort of curious now, before Broden's diagnosis, did you or Shelly have any exposure or experience with the special needs community?
Not really. I mean, I don't think a lot of people do. I had a cousin that had Down syndrome. And, so growing up, I was aware of it, but I'm not sure that, neither one of us were immersed in it, which I think is probably kind of pretty normal, I'm assuming, is what you hear a lot of times.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm sort of curious now, how did the autism diagnosis come about, and what was your first reaction?
Sure, absolutely. So like I said, I was at school in Kansas, and we began to notice that Broden wouldn't react to certain things. And we literally thought, and we convinced he had a physician's assistant when we assigned through the military that was kind of, checking up on him and stuff like that, kind of his doctor. And we can kind of convinced her too that we thought he might be deaf because there's just, we were in Kansas and you get these amazing thunderstorms and all this kind of stuff. And the thunder would go off, the dog would bark, we'd all scream, and Broden would just sit there. But we knew that the visual cues were there because he was very interested in visualization, cartoons, and the visual stimulus. So we literally thought he was deaf. And so we went through a series of hearing tests and so on. And in fact, the Army actually paid us to go up to Omaha, Nebraska to do kind of an extensive auditory test where, they hooked a bunch of electrodes to him, they put him in a quiet room, and they monitored him. And it was kind of a shock when we got done, because we got done and the doctor looks at us and says, "Your son can hear fine." And we're like, "Well, what's wrong then?" We're expecting more than that. And he goes, "Well, I can't really tell you. I just can tell you it's not his hearing." And so I remember we walked out of the hospital and back to the hotel, and we're just bewildered. We just we don't know what's going on. Shelly hopped on our laptop at the time and started calling. And finally, I don't remember, I'd have to ask her. I don't remember exactly who she got a hold of, but I think it was somebody with the early intervention services back in Kansas. And they're like, "Hey, look, you got to get him into an interdisciplinary team then." She's like, I don't want to tell you what I think it is, but if it's not a physical disability, then it might be something else. And so an interdisciplinary team will look at all these different things. And so we're like, okay. And so we went back to his doctor, told her everything, ended up getting on a wait list. Of course, in our world, there's all these wait lists. And so we got on this wait list, and I remember Shelly would just call every day just to see if there was an opening. And finally, one day there was an opening, and off we went to the KU Med, and they interviewed Shelly and I. We felt like it was an interrogation. I mean, I'm sure many parents out there have gone through that. What did he eat? How did he sleep? What did you do? Blah, blah, blah. And then, somebody was evaluating Broden. And finally, when they got done, they're like, "Yeah, he has autism." And I think, you get hit with shock, you get hit with depression, you get hit with, I can't believe this is happening. But I think the one thing that, looking back, that Shelly and I would both say is we're there's so many things in our world that you're looking for, okay, this is the way ahead. What's the treatment? And I think what floored us was that there wasn't any treatment. There was, well, here's some pamphlets. Here's some pamphlets on, there's this Defeat Autism Now program. And then there's this thing called Applied Behavioral Analysis Therapy. And so that was just kind of the blow. And I remember we walked out of there just kind of stunned. And I remember Shelly ran to the restroom, and I think later on in her book, she described, I didn't know at the time what was going on, but she's like dry heaving, she says in her book, just from the stress and everything, and we kind of walked out of it. And then, that night she starts looking for BCBAs, wait list. And finally we found this one BCBA that she's like, okay, I can take a look at him in a couple weeks, And so that was kind of the way ahead, kind of the diagnosis, and then where we saw maybe a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, if I can paraphrase what you've said, Mark, it was very unsettling. You weren't prepared for the news or the information about the diagnosis, and there wasn't a context to put the information in. And, it sounded like you were sort of on your own, right, to come up to speed. And there was a little bit of a delay, right, as far as having access to more information or a further diagnosis. So, were there some fears that you remember experiencing early on, or maybe as things transpired that you can recall?
It's funny. My first fear was, honestly, and this is going to sound crazy, my first fear was, oh my gosh, Shelly is outrunning me right now. Because, I think she's a mom and this is her baby, and she is trying to find ways to fix it. And honestly, I'm still processing everything. Later we would find out that too, I'm fighting with PTSD I just come back from that first tour I described. And it was very interesting. My fear was, I'm not going to be able to do enough as a dad. I'm not going to be able to pull my weight. I'm not going to be able to keep up with Shelly. And so those were probably my two biggest fears. As we began to navigate, after about the first month, I finally looked at Shelly and I was like, you can't do this all by yourself. How can I help? I told her that. I said, you're outrunning me. And I said, how can I help? And it was kind of, what we kind of figured out then at that point was, since I was still in the military, and that seemed to be the best place for us at the time, is I was going to navigate the military systems. I was going to, our healthcare is provided by a TRICARE. And so, I was going to be the one that navigates how to get Broden his referrals. We have a program in the military called the Exceptional Family Member Program. And so I would be the one that would enroll us in that. And what it does is it ensures that I can only get assigned places where Broden can get taken care of. And so I began to be the advocate on that side, and Shelly began to be the go-between between therapists and doctors. And, she would research who she needed to get a referral to and then come to me, and I'd figure out how to make that happen on the other side. And it allowed us to kind of share the weight.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. That's really important. No matter whether you're a military family or a non-military family, for that matter.
Absolutely.
And another observation that comes to mind is that, men and women, husband and wives, mom and dad don't always process the situation at the same pace.
No, definitely not.
We could be ahead, our spouse could be ahead. Dads generally, experience a certain level of denial. Like, oh, why don't we give it a little bit more time, or we'll cross that bridge when we get there, and let's not be too hasty, right? Let's not pre-worry our worries.
Absolutely.
These are things that I find myself saying, Mark, over and over.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, my famous saying is it'll be fine, That's
So, credit to our wives. Maybe they're just more accepting, understanding of reality.
Yeah.
And there's got to be a certain amount of grace that goes along with, coming to that understanding, which is, we're both going to get there, but maybe not at the same time or the same speed. And there's a give and take in a relationship. And I sort of heard you saying that as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Was there any meaningful advice, looking back on it a dozen years now, that you can look back and say, oh, I'm really glad, this person, or we got that advice?
Yeah, I think On my side, we got to meet a family that, well, they're still friends with us, and she actually went on to be a BCBA and was Broden's BCBA, and he's a general officer now. But Andy and Nikki Helms kind of were, well, I won't get the years right, but they were definitely ahead of us in the journey. And I think the one thing that they both told us is that it was okay to fight for Broden. It was okay to buck the Army system. I think sometimes we don't want to buck the system, but it's okay to buck the system to take care of your child. They showed us that you could still have a successful career with a special needs child. And I think as I've gone through my career, that was probably some great advice as we go, because I think you can tell me better, David, because I haven't been in the civilian world for 25 years, but I think I get a persona sometimes that I'm a leader in the Army and I'm supposed to be put on this pedestal and I'm not supposed to have all these flaws. You know, we have some great stories where Broden just brings us right back to reality, but it's great because it allows us to stay humble and it allows us to connect with those around us. And I've got to mentor so many other younger families in the military because just at the right moment, Broden will just bring us right back down. You know, I remember I got my first battalion command and we were doing a big event at our house. One of the things Broden likes is he likes to wear texture is big, you know, and he likes to wear his favorite pair of pajama pants. So when he's done with school, those pajama pants are going on. And we were so busy getting ready to host all these people at our house that we didn't think about Broden's pajama pants were in the laundry, which were in the basement of our house. And so we're doing this big thing right in the foyer of our house, and here comes Broden with no pants on. And Broden's on a mission to go downstairs to get his pajama pants, right? And so, you know, it's like, oh, well, here's Broden, you know? And I think it was great because as embarrassing as it was at the time, it was also a great lesson in humility. And after that, people were not afraid to bring issues to us and talk to us. And it was exactly what the organization needed at the time. And Broden did it.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I can only imagine at the time you're like totally embarrassed. You're shocked, actually.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, when you look back on it, as you're recalling this story, which no doubt you've told numerous times, you know, there is a lot of levity to it, right? You know, and that's just part of what makes life fun and interesting.
Absolutely.
There's an interesting comment a military leader shared with me in one of these interviews. It was actually interview 100, Doran Olmug, the revered person in the Israeli Defense Force, who also had a son with autism. And the way he described it, and it was very profound for me, that's why I'm sharing it, was that the experience of raising a son in both your cases with autism made him more humble, less arrogant, and less selfish. And, you know, at the end of the day, you want to be around people who are more humble, less arrogant, and less selfish, right? Those are the people that make the world go around. Those are the people you want to spend more time with. And, you know, you'd like to think we could get there without these, you know, dramatic experiences.
Right.
Anyway, thanks for sharing. So not to focus on the negative, but to be real, I'm wondering what some of the bigger challenges have been for you and Shelly, or for Broden for that matter.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I think there's a couple challenges, and I don't think they're unique to just the military. So the first challenge is obviously I had 3 more deployments, combat deployments, and a couple training deployments after Broden's diagnosis. So there's always, Shelly and I always call it, we always have to be very deliberate the older we get, because I think early on we didn't think about what roles and responsibilities people would do. And so, you know, I'm out the door, Shelly takes over everything. She's running kids to therapy. You know, we've got our oldest son, Hayden, who's typical. So he's going to school, sports, all this kind of stuff. So she takes on the role of mom and dad. And then all of a sudden, after 6 or 9 months, you know, I'm back in and I'm looking around and I'm like, well, what do you need me to do? And she goes, nothing. You know, I feel like we had to enter some delicate negotiations there, but it's life, you know, you get going and you get focused on things, you know, and I think I shared with you in our first phone call when we met was the good side of some of this is, and I think you equated it to grandparents, was I see the immense progress he makes because I've been gone for 6 months, and Shelly's in the knife fight. And sometimes she'd be like so frustrated. Well, I can't believe he's not doing this. And I can't believe he's not doing this. And we've been working on this for months. And I'm like, oh my God, look at all this stuff he can do. And so it kind of brings some perspective for our family. So that's a good side of it. But the other side of it is figuring out those roles and responsibilities. So that, I think that's one. It's always a challenge because I feel guilty. I'm missing, I think, but technology has been great. I have done IEP meetings now. I've done counseling sessions just like you and I are right now, thousands of miles away. When we first were diagnosed, we couldn't have done that. And it's just a matter of making time for it. I think the other challenge is that you just don't forget you got the other challenges in life. We're raising another child who is going through different things. And then, I shared earlier, I think right when Baird's diagnosis was going on, I was battling PTSD from my first deployment. And between autism and that, it took us a lot longer to get everything under control and back in balance. So those are some of the downsides, but there are some silver linings in there.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It's not a straight line. You do have those challenges of just raising more than one child, right? Typical or otherwise.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a balancing act in and of itself. And I'm sort of curious to know, along those lines, what impact has Broden's situation had on his older brother, your marriage, or the extended family, for that matter?
Sure. Being military is hard I'll start with the extended family. I think both my parents and Shelly's parents, they feel challenged because we move all around. We were lucky enough in Texas. We got to spend like the last 3 or 4 years there. We were only about an hour apart. So for them, they got to see quite a bit of Broden and Hayden growing up. But then once we were out to Georgia and now in Columbia, and then with the pandemic, we're going to see my parents next week for the first time in 2 years. And I can't wait. They're just going to be floored at the different progresses. We can Zoom and we can see it, but it's just not the same as being able to spend every holiday together. So that's a challenge on the extended family. I think the blessings are, though, that both have done a phenomenal job of finding ways to help Broden in different ways. And so I talked early on that my father was a grant writer. And so he's big into finances, and he did lots of research and for all his grandkids, but especially Broden helped, things that you don't think about, like a special needs trust. We did the legwork with the lawyers, but then my dad helped figure out with some of the stuff on how to set up some future stuff for Broden that you wouldn't think about. A typical kid, you do your college fund and then you kind of hope they're out of the nest and going. Our special needs kids, you got to have a lot longer term planning on. And I think that's something that my dad did, even though he's not been in the fight every day. Shelly's parents, on the other hand, have planned trips around times when we need somebody to watch Broden. And, even if it means flying halfway across the country, they will do that to help us either do something with my career or even for Shelly as an autism advocate. I remember her mom flying in because I had a bunch of training to do, and her mom flew in so that she could go to an advocate conference in Washington, D.C. at one point, So those are things that the extended family has done. Within our immediate family, I think at times, I don't want to speak for him, but I think just watching Hayden, at times he does feel like he is only child. That there are certain things that he gets to do, but he knows that he can't do because Broden can't go with him when he sees younger siblings. He's had to suffer through just one parent being at sporting events because Hayden played basketball for many years and it was just too loud for a while for Broden. We finally got him to get some hearing protection and he could come, so that was good. But there are just certain things that Broden couldn't go to or handle. And so Hayden got stuck with the one parent in the stands versus two. I think the good thing, though, is that at now, I don't think of anybody else that knows Broden better than Hayden. And I think, Hayden will step up to the plate at a moment's notice if we've got to do something and watch Broden, knows how to take care of him, knows how to handle outbursts, knows what his diet is. I mean, he's kind of a walking encyclopedia on what he needs. And is in tune with him. He can anticipate as fast as I think Shelly and I can now when something's going to upset him or something's off balance. So I think, as we've had the struggles, it has shaped Hayden a lot. In fact, he just got hired here in Columbia. We've got a special needs camp called Camp Cole that they just stood up for a lot of different special needs kids. And so to help with his college resume, Hayden's going to go be a counselor there for some volunteer hours here in a couple of weeks. And it was fun listening to the interview because they were like throwing situations at him, and Hayden's like, "Oh, I take care of that all the time with my brother," And so, I think he was kind of a shoo-in for the job.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. I'm thinking about supporting organizations now, and I'm wondering, you mentioned the Exceptional Family Member Program, as being sort of critical or essential.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's not just for families like yourself who have a child with autism, but it probably is for a lot of different diagnoses. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. In the Army and the Air Force, we have really two EFMP programs. One is tied to our medical system, and once you're enrolled in that will ensure that you're only assigned where your family member gets care. And I'll come back to that one in a second. And the second one is kind of a community service type organization that connects you with support groups and activities and so on. And then the Navy and the Marine Corps kind of combine theirs. And so they're just a little bit different between the services. I think it's more efficient looking across the fence and seeing what the Navy and the Marine Corps do, but we'll see if the Army gets there. But coming back to the medical needs, you're exactly right, David, that it's for any family member. I've had friends who's had family members with cancer. They've taken on their parents as a dependent to take care of some of their medical things. And so all of those allow the soldier to enroll in that program. So whatever need is out there that is a medical necessity, then the Army can only assign them where they can get that care.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the writing that Shelly does. She writes a column entitled Puzzles in Camo for the Exceptional Parent magazine, and she also wrote a book that came out in January of 2017 entitled Giving a Voice to the Silent Many. And I'm wondering, where did the motivation come to be writing with as much as she has on her plate?
Yeah. Well, I think for Shelly, writing started as kind of a way to process the diagnosis and process just everything that she was going through. She is a communications teacher by trade and professor. And so I think her writing was her way of kind of voicing it. And she kind of fell into Exceptional Parent magazine because that was some of the articles that we gotten handed out to us early on in Broden's. And I think she read a couple of the articles and she's like, well, I need to share our story. And then they just kept asking her back, and kept asking her to write about different things. And then pretty soon they made a column for her. And because they decided that, that was something that they needed. The book, I think, was something that Shelly always wanted to do along the way. And I think that was probably one of the most therapeutic things to help Shelly process that I've ever seen her go through. And actually, it was fun. I think it was one of the fun parts in our marriage. I don't know if she'll agree with me, but we took every one of her columns, and I remember she was just laying them out on the floor to try to figure out how to piece them together in the chapters, and then I would go find them on the computer and again piece them together electronically, for her, and then allow her to she wove everything in and did all that kind of stuff. But I think it was all part of her process to be able to talk about what she's been through, think about what she's been through, and kind of synthesize everything. And we definitely wanted to tell a story. We're not out to I think we hand out more books than we sell just because we want people to know that they're not alone. And really Shelly does. And she actually told me something the other day that I didn't realize. She goes, I get a lot of people asking for my book just for the chapter that you talk about being a dad. So I guess there's not a lot of stuff out until you started your stuff, David, about dads. So, because she said that was always one of the things that a lot of people were asking for. So,
yeah, well, maybe she'll have two things to hand out, her book with the chapter that people are asking about for dads, and then this podcast.
There you go.
Which, she'll be able to share, you'll be able to share. And I'm very serious about it, right? There's not a lot of material out there for dads. And I think that, as simple or as basic as it is that you're relating your story, it's sort of like enlightening, right? Especially if you can put yourself back 10 years ago when you were a younger family and you were on the beginning of your journey.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot more unknowns then. So, just you sharing your story and, being more matter of fact about it. Obviously, it's been very challenging, but, you have a different perspective now, right? It's like when you take on leadership roles, right? You're taking on more responsibility. You exert yourself, you stretch yourself. And then once you get to wherever it is, it doesn't seem like it's that extraordinary. But when you're climbing the mountain, when things are hard, you just don't know what is around the corner or what's beyond the hill type of deal.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. And I'm thinking about advice now beyond what we've already discussed. If there's any important takeaways that you might share, A, for a military family, and then B, just for dads at large and the wider community.
Sure. I think my elevator pitch for military families is a couple things. Number one is you can have a successful career in the military with a special needs child or special needs family member and still take care of them. I have unfortunately seen families that might sacrifice things to try to get a certain assignment, but honestly, you can do it. The thing is you got to be honest and be enrolled in the EFMP program, like I said earlier, because then the military knows and they won't assign you somewhere else. I would say for everyone, for all dads and husbands out there, it takes a partnership with your spouse. It takes a lot of patience in a lot of communication, talking through feelings, responsibilities, jobs, who's doing what. I mean, if you don't talk, and especially the feelings part, I mean, which is probably the hardest thing for me to always talk about. Though Shelly would say I'm probably the more emotional one, and she's probably right. But I mean, you've seen her write her book, so that's her way of processing it. So I think it's that communication piece, because if you don't know what your partner's going through and you don't know what your partner's taking care of, then you're not complimenting each other. And honestly, we like to joke sometimes that navigating this is like being in a canoe, and you got to paddle together, or you're not going to go anywhere, or you're going to go in circles, or that's probably the best analogy we come up with.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And the image of the canoe comes to mind. It seems like the person in the back does most of the work. At least that's been my experience, and sort of keeps you, going in the direction that you're intending to go. And another thought that comes to mind is you don't want to stand up.
That's true.
You don't want to get the canoe out of balance.
That's right.
So thanks for sharing. So I'm sort of curious to know, why is it that you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
I think that I've been doing it already inside the military. So if it helps connect to a broader audience, then great. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a friend of mine that he was like, hey, he's like, Mark, I got this young major working for me, and they just found out their son has autism. Can you take a few minutes to talk to him? And I was like, by all means, here's my number. And so I think it's just, I didn't have that when I went through it. I literally stumbled through it with Shelly. And I just, like you asked in that question, who was the biggest thing? There was somebody that had gone ahead of it and been through a few more doors than I had, that could look back and say, okay, this is kind of what's coming up next, or this is what I think you need to do, or here's some things we tried and didn't work. Sometimes that's as good advice as anything. And so having that meant a lot at some crucial moments for me. So I think that's the biggest reason.
Yeah, well, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for being involved. In fact, I would say that a very, very large majority of the 500 plus dads in the network, the mentor fathers, have said, I wish there was something like this when I was a younger dad. And the more authentic ones might actually add, then I don't know that I would have taken advantage of it, though.
Well, that's true. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's some male pride that sometimes gets in our way. But I think that's okay too. You just got to be willing to make the phone call. You might not have to be wanting to talk, I mean, us old guys, we'll tell stories all day long. So, I mean, if you just have the phone call and listen, might get you something.
Absolutely. Well, let's give a special shout out to your lovely wife, Shelly, and our mutual friends at Exceptional Parent Magazine for helping connect us.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, I mean, Thank you for your persistence in getting me on here, and I'm just glad that I could share a story, and hopefully somebody out there I can help out just by listening to me.
If somebody wants to learn more about the book, Giving a Voice to the Silent, or contact you, what would the best way to do that be?
Well, they can contact me through your network, obviously. The other way is Giving a Voice to the Silent Mini has its own website. It also has its own Facebook page. And so you can contact us through that if you search both of those and just shoot us a message on that. And that would probably be the fastest way to connect with us. And we can share other contact information on what's more convenient for whoever's trying to reach us.
I'll make sure to include all that in the show notes. Mark, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Mark is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you. Great being here.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Dad to Dad podcast was produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.